The message came on a Tuesday morning, and Daniel Harper knew it meant trouble before he even read it. He stood in the communications room of Earth's orbital station and watched the alien symbols appear in the air. The computer turned them into English words he could understand. It was another summons from the Galactic Council, and this made 8 times in 8 months. Patricia Wells sat at her station nearby and did not look up from her screen, but her voice carried the tiredness they all felt these days. She said this was another summons, and Daniel nodded because what else could it be? The Council always wanted something from humanity, and they never asked nicely anymore. Daniel read through the message with careful attention, and his jaw got tighter with each line. The Council wanted humanity to come to their central forum within 30 days. They said humans had broken the rules by expanding into the Kepler sector without permission. They expected humanity to accept punishment and follow the territorial rules the Council made. He sent the message to Earth's government and to the people who ran the colonies. Within minutes, his brain implant buzzed with calls from Geneva and New York and Mars. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next, and Daniel did not have good answers for any of them. Lisa Monroe walked into the communications room wearing her crisp uniform despite the early hour. She had protected Earth's orbital stations for 2 years now, and she could smell trouble before it arrived. She looked at the alien writing in the air and asked if the Council wanted humans to abandon another colony. Her voice said she already knew the answer. Daniel told her it was 3 colonies this time, and he listed them one by one. New Portland and Haven's Rest and all the mining operations around Kepler. 442, the Council claimed humanity had violated the settlement rules from the Accords of 2187, and they wanted everything shut down, and everyone moved out. Lisa's face went hard, and she reminded Daniel that the Accords were rules humanity never signed because the Council presented them as facts instead of negotiations. The galaxy had welcomed humans with open arms 5 years ago when Earth's first faster-than-light ship stumbled into
Council space.
Commander Jake Sullivan and his crew got treated like honored guests, and they saw ancient civilizations and wonders that seemed impossible before, but the warmth faded fast once humanity started spreading across the stars. The Council operated on rules they refined over thousands of years. Strict territorial boundaries and rigid social rankings and complete obedience to the elder species who had been around forever. Humanity did not do obedience well, and that became a problem. Lisa asked what Earth's Defense Committee was saying about the summons. Daniel checked his messages and told her that Secretary Graham wanted a full briefing in 6 hours. Admiral Torres recommended sending a delegation but preparing to refuse their demands. Director Chen from Colonial Affairs argued for trying to negotiate one more time. Lisa repeated the word negotiation in a flat voice that said what she thought about that idea. She reminded Daniel that negotiation had not worked the last 7 times they tried it. The problem was simple, even if solving it was impossible. The Council viewed the galaxy like a carefully managed garden where each species got specific territories based on how old they were and what the Council thought they contributed to galactic civilization. New species had to accept whatever left over territories the Council decided to give them, and those territories were usually resource poor and far from established trade routes. Humanity accepted this arrangement at first because they did not know any better. The first colonies got built in the designated zones without complaint from anyone. But human nature and human needs did not line up with what the Council expected. The colonies grew faster than anyone predicted. Human engineers solved problems the Council considered impossible to fix. Within 3 years, humanity needed more space and more resources and more freedom to grow. The Council's response was predictable and frustrating. They denied all expansion requests and cited the sacred principles of territorial integrity that had maintained peace for 10,000 years. When humanity expanded anyway because people needed places to live, the summons started arriving with regular frequency. Daniel pulled up the star charts and added, human colonies in blue against Council territories in red. The Kepler sector sat in what the Council called disputed space, though as far as Daniel could tell, no Council species had shown any interest in that area for over 3,000 years. The systems had plenty of resources, but needed advanced terraforming technology that most Council species either lacked or considered too much trouble to bother with. Humanity turned a lifeless rocks into successful colonies in 18 months, and now the Council wanted them gone. Lisa looked at the charts over his shoulder and said the Council would demand humans dismantle everything they built. 15,000 colonists and all the infrastructure and the agricultural domes and the orbital platforms. The Council would want it all erased, like it never existed. Daniel said the Council could demand whatever they wanted, but the real question was what humanity planned to do about those demands. His implant chimed with a priority message from Earth, and Secretary Graham's tired face appeared in a small window of light. The man looked older than his 53 years, and the stress showed in every line on his face. Graham told Daniel to get on the next shuttle to Geneva because they were calling an emergency session of the government. Daniel asked what the mood was like down on Earth, and Graham's expression got grimmer. He said the diplomatic people wanted to find a compromise, and the military was tired of backing down every time. The colonists were talking about armed resistance if anyone tried to force them to evacuate their homes. And the public knew everything because information spread instantly across all human space these days, Graham explained. This was not like the old days when governments could handle difficult situations quietly. Every human with a brain implant knew about the Council's summons by now, and everyone had opinions about what should happen next. The colonists in the Kepler sector already knew. Someone might order them to abandon their homes and they would not leave without a fight. Daniel said he would be in Geneva in 8 hours, and the call ended. He stood for a long moment staring at the star chart that showed humanity's expansion. 43 star systems in 5 years, and not the orderly, controlled expansion the Council preferred. It was chaotic and energetic growth that characterized human civilization throughout all of history. Humans built cities on hostile worlds, and established trade networks, and created art and culture in the depths of space. Far from Earth now, the Council wanted them to shrink back and accept their assigned place in the galactic hierarchy and be grateful for whatever scraps the elder species offered. Lisa came to stand beside him, and she said she knew what was going to happen next. Her voice carried certainty that surprised Daniel. He asked her to tell him what she thought would happen, and Lisa laid it out in simple terms. She said humans would walk into that council chamber and listen to lectures about rules and protocols and the sacred order that maintained galactic peace. The council would demand compliance and threaten consequences if humanity refused to obey. Then humanity would tell them no. And Lisa sounded absolutely certain about this. Daniel asked why she was so sure, and Lisa gestured at the star chart showing all those blue dots that represented human colonies scattered across space. She said every single one of those colonies existed because someone refused to accept limitations, because someone looked at the impossible and decided to try anyway, despite what anyone else said. She told Daniel that humans did not claw their way up from Earth's gravity well and cross the empty void between stars, just to ask permission from species who stopped dreaming thousands of years ago. Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and the weight of what was coming. Daniel said quietly that her attitude was going to cause a war, and Lisa acknowledged that possibility with a simple maybe. But then, she said, maybe it would remind the galaxy what it meant to be truly alive, instead of just existing in comfortable stagnation. The choice was coming whether anyone was ready for it or not, and humanity would have to decide what mattered more. The Central Forum orbited a neutron star at the heart of Council space, and it was massive beyond anything humanity had built. The station had served as the seat of galactic government for over 10,000 years, and Daniel Harper felt uneasy every time he visited. The place was beautiful and ancient and completely dead in all the ways that mattered. The shuttle carrying the human delegation docked at Berth 74, which was far from the important central ports reserved for the elder species. Daniel came out with his team, and they included Jake Sullivan, whose exploration had brought humanity to Council attention in the first place. Helen Torres was an expert in studying different civilizations, and Patricia Wells served as both military advisor and technical specialist. Ketha Tennant met them at the dock, and the creature looked like an insect with crystal eyes and mandibles that clicked when it talked. The translation device in Daniel's brain implant turned the clicks into words he could understand. The attendant told them the council expected them in Chamber 9, and they should follow immediately. The walk through the station took 20 minutes, and they passed through corridors lined with artwork from civilizations that rose and fell while humanity still lived in caves. Daniel found it inspiring on his first visit, but now it just seemed like a museum, where things went to be preserved instead of lived. Everything was perfectly maintained, and nothing ever changed. That felt wrong somehow. Chamber 9 was smaller than the Grand Assembly Hall, but still impressive by human standards. The space was circular, with seating arranged in rising tiers that went up toward a domed ceiling decorated with star charts from 50 different worlds. The council representatives were already there, waiting in all. 17 of them represented species older than human civilization. The Kaversh ambassadors sat in the highest tier, and its crystalline body broke light into rainbow patterns. The Kavrish were the oldest council species, and their civilization stretched back 40,000 years. Next to it sat Ambassador Thren of the Morvai. It was a methane-breathing species that looked like a cloud of gas inside an environmental suit. The other representatives filled the remaining seats, and they were a collection of forms that would have seemed impossible before humanity reached the stars. The Kavrish spoke, and the voice came from a translator device that turned crystalline chimes into words. It said Daniel stood before the council, charged with violating territorial protocols and unauthorized expansion and disregard for established boundaries. It asked how Daniel answered these charges. Daniel stepped forward into the center of the chamber, while the council sat in judgment above him. The design made the accused feel small and insignificant, but Daniel had learned not to let it work on him. He said clearly that humanity had expanded beyond the territories initially assigned to them. He did not acknowledge that this was a violation because the territories they settled were unclaimed and unused and did not conflict with existing council. Settlements movement rippled through the assembled representatives like wind through grass. The Dreth ambassador looked like a massive turtle with 6 eyes, and it spoke next. It said the territories were unclaimed by human understanding, perhaps, but they were deliberately left undeveloped and held in reserve for future allocation. According to council procedures, Helen Torres interrupted, even though she was not supposed to speak without being addressed first. She never followed protocols she considered stupid, and this was one of them. She said the procedures took an average of 400 years to complete, and they had reviewed the archives. The Kepler sector had been under consideration for the past 3,000 years, and if that was how the council defined efficiency, she would hate to see their idea of bureaucratic delay. Several council members shifted in their seats with discomfort. The Keth attendants standing around the chambers clicked their mandibles in sounds that might have been amusement or disapproval or something else entirely. The Morvai ambassador's gas cloud swirled violently inside its containment suit. It said humanity had been part of the galactic community for barely 5 years, and the arrogance of questioning processes refined over thousands of years was exactly the problem the council wanted to address. Jake Sullivan said with respect that humans were not questioning the age of council processes, but rather relevance to the modern galaxy. The council organized everything 10,000 years ago, and that galaxy did not exist anymore. The council controlled less than a third of explored space, and the rest was empty and waiting. He asked why anyone should wait centuries for permission to settle worlds that nobody else wanted. The Kavrish said simply that this was the law, and it was the order that maintained peace for longer than humanity possessed language. Its voice carried the weight of millennia and the absolute certainty that came from never being challenged. Daniel had heard this argument before, and it always came down to the same thing. The council's position was fundamentally conservative, and the systems that worked for thousands of years should not be changed. The fact that those systems also resulted in technological stagnation and cultural death and the decline of member species into comfortable irrelevance did not seem to concern them at all. Daniel said carefully that humanity was not interested in disrupting the Council's peace, but humans needed room to grow, and their population was expanding, and their technology was advancing. Humanity could not simply freeze itself in place, because that was how things had always been done for the elder species. The Threll Ambassador was a floating sphere of energy that pulsed with shifting colors. It said perhaps humanity expanded too quickly, and perhaps humans should have controlled their reproduction and limited their ambitions, and accepted the wisdom of species far older than their own. The casual dismissal of human nature delivered as obvious. Truth sent anger flashing through Daniel. He controlled it and maintained his diplomatic face, but he could see the same anger reflected in his team's expressions. They were tired of being lectured by species who had forgotten what it meant to grow. Daniel said he needed to be clear about something, and his voice was steady and firm. Humanity was not going to stop growing because the Council was uncomfortable with the pace. Humans would not abandon colonies they built just because the Council decided they should not have built them. And humanity would not restructure their entire civilization to fit into boxes. It's designed for species that stopped evolving before humans left their caves on Earth. The silence that followed was profound and heavy. Council chambers were places of carefully modulated debate and diplomatic language and negotiated compromises. Direct confrontation was considered primitive, an evidence of an underdeveloped civilization that did not understand proper behavior. The Kivrash's crystalline form refracted light in sharp, angular patterns that suggested agitation. It asked if Daniel refused to comply with Council authority, and its voice had lost the carefully controlled, diplomatic tone. Daniel said he was refusing to accept authority that did not recognize humanity's right to exist on their own terms. The Council could keep its protocols and its procedures and its 10,000-year-old bureaucracy that accomplished nothing. But the Council did not get to dictate how humanity lived or where humanity went in. The vast empty spaces between the stars, the Dreth, Ambassador's 6 eyes focused on Daniel with intensity that was almost physical. It asked if Daniel understood what he was saying and explained that rejection of Council authority meant rejection of Council protection. It meant isolation from galactic trade networks and from access to elder technologies, and from the diplomatic frameworks that prevented conflict between species. Patricia Wells said humans understood perfectly, and they were saying no anyway. Her voice carried no doubt or hesitation, and the Council members shifted uneasily because they were not used to being refused by anyone. Helen Torres pulled up a holographic display showing data that made several Council members look away. She said her team analyzed 5,000 years of Council records and asked if they wanted to know what humans found. Technological advancement among member species declined by 74% since joining the Council. Cultural innovation had nearly stopped completely. Population growth averaged almost 0% annually across all member species. The Council created a system so focused on preservation that they forgot how to actually live. The Morvi ambassador said peace and stability required sacrifice, and humanity would learn this truth in time. Its gas cloud moved slowly, like it was tired of explaining obvious things to children who would not listen. Jake Sullivan said maybe Council species had forgotten what it meant to strive for something better. Humans had seen their worlds during diplomatic visits, and everything was beautiful and advanced and comfortable, and utterly static, without any change or growth or dreams of what might come next. He asked how many centuries had passed since the Kavesh produced anything new, and when was the last time the Dreth explored beyond their established borders. The Council built a paradise of stagnation and called it wisdom. The Kavrish rose from its seat in light, cascaded from its crystalline form in waves. It said the Council maintained peace across 3,000 star systems for 10,000 years. They prevented wars and managed resources and created a civilization that spanned the galaxy. And humans who were representatives of a species barely capable of interstellar travel dared to lecture them about how to govern. Daniel said yes simply and without apology. Someone needed to lecture the council because they spent so long managing decline that they forgot what growth looked like. They made peace their only goal and forgot that peace without purpose was just slow death stretched across millennia. The Threll ambassador pulsed with red light that filled the chamber with an angry glow. It said this was completely unacceptable, and the council demanded compliance immediately. Humanity would evacuate the Kepler sector colonies within 90 standard cycles and submit all expansion plans for council approval and accept the territorial limitations established by the governing body. These were not requests, but orders that must be followed. Daniel looked at his team and saw determination in their faces. It was the same determination he saw in colonists who left Earth to build new worlds and in engineers, who solved impossible problems and in every human who ever looked at the stars and decided to reach for them despite being told it could not be done. He turned back to face the council sitting in their tiered seats above him. He said one word that echoed in the chamber's perfect acoustics, and that word was no. Simple and final and absolute. Around the tiers, council representatives stirred in agitation. Mandibles clicked, and energy fields fluctuated in crystalline forms, refracted light in patterns that suggested confusion and anger. They were not used to being refused by anyone, and certainly not by a species as young as humanity. The Cavrish asked if Daniel was refusing, and its voice had lost all pretense of diplomatic courtesy. It asked if he understood the consequences of what he was doing. Helen Torres said, humans understood that the council could not imagine anyone refusing their authority. That was the real problem here. The council had been saying yes to themselves for so long that they forgot what the word no sounded like when someone else said it. The Dreth. Its ambassador's shell creaked as it shifted its massive body. It said the council could impose sanctions and close trade routes and isolate humanity from the galactic community entirely. The threat hung in the air, heavy with implied consequences. Patricia Wells said the council could try to do those things. But here was something they might want to consider first. Humanity did not need council trade routes as much as the council thought. Humans did not need technologies that had not been updated in 1,000 years. And humanity certainly did not need permission from ancient species to exist in the universe. Daniel raised his hand, and a holographic display appeared above his palm, showing human space in glowing blue light. 43 star systems connected by trade routes and dotted with manufacturing centers and agricultural worlds and research stations. It was a small corner of the galaxy compared to Council space, but it was vibrant and growing and alive in ways Council space had not been for millennia. Daniel said humanity built all of this in 5 years. Humans turned barren rocks into gardens and established colonies on worlds the Council considered completely uninhabitable. They developed technologies the Council did not think were possible. And humanity did it all, while the Council was still processing their application for minor species status in the bureaucratic systems. He expanded the display to show projections stretching into the future. In 10 years, humanity would have 100 systems. In 20 years, 200 systems. Not because humans were trying to threaten the Council or challenge their authority, but because that was what humanity did naturally. Humans grew and explored and built, and they did not ask permission from anyone to do what was in there. Nature. The Morvi ambassador's gas cloud swirled violently inside its containment suit like a storm trying to break free. It said this was hubris of the highest order, and humanity would destroy itself with this recklessness. The species was too young and too aggressive and too unwilling to learn from those who came before. Daniel said maybe. The Council was right, and maybe humanity would destroy itself. But it would be humanity's choice to make, and their risk to take, and their future to build or burn as they saw fit. No one else got to make those decisions for them. He closed the holographic display with a gesture and met the Kavarish ambassador's crystalline gaze directly. He said humans came to this chamber as a courtesy to explain their position. But humanity was done pretending that the Council had any authority over them. The Council wanted to maintain their systems and their protocols and their comfortable stagnation, and that was fine. They could do it without humanity being part of it. Jake Sullivan stepped forward, and his voice was clear and firm. He said that effective immediately, humanity withdrew from all council organizations and treaties and agreements. Humans were not declaring war and not making threats. Humanity was simply choosing to go their own way in the galaxy. The Kavrish said humans would regret this decision, and its voice resonated through the chamber with the weight of 10,000 years of authority. It said the galaxy was not kind to species that stood alone without the protection of the greater community. Daniel said then humanity would learn that lesson themselves through direct experience. But at least they would be standing on their own feet instead of kneeling before councils that cared more about process than progress. He turned toward the exit. Had his team fell in beside him. Their footsteps echoed on the chamber's polished floor as they walked away from the council. Behind them, the assembled representatives erupted into agitated discussion with voices raised for the first time in centuries. The careful diplomatic calm had shattered completely as they walked through the corridors. Back toward their shuttle, Patricia Wells let out a long breath. She said they just made history one way or another. Jake Sullivan said they probably just started a war instead. His voice carried concern but not regret for what they had done. Helen Torres said it was probably both things at the same time. History and war often came together when major changes happened. She sounded excited rather than worried about the possibilities. Daniel did not slow his pace as they headed for the docking berth. He said if the council wanted to come after humanity, then humans would be ready to face them. There was no going back now from the choice they made in that chamber. The shuttle trip back to human space felt different than the trip there. They left as diplomats trying to find compromise, and they returned as representatives of an independent species that refused to bow to anyone. The weight of that change sat heavy on all of them. Patricia accessed the communication networks. Her face went pale as she read the incoming messages. She said the news of humanity's withdrawal from the council was spreading through human space at light speed. Every settlement from Earth to the furthest colony in the Kepler sector knew what happened in Chamber 9. Jake asked what the reaction was like, and Patricia scrolled through hundreds of messages. She said it was immediate and completely divided. Some humans were celebrating the Declaration of Independence. Others were terrified of the consequences. The colonial governors wanted to know what happens next, and Earth's government was in emergency session trying to figure out a response. Helen pulled up tactical displays showing Council fleet movements near human territory. She said the military situation was developing fast. Council vessels were repositioning near human borders and forming what looked like blockade formations. Nothing overtly hostile yet, but the message was absolutely clear. Humanity was being isolated and cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Daniel studied the tactical display with growing concern. Red icons marked council ships creating a ring around human-controlled space. He asked how long until they were completely surrounded and cut off from everything beyond their borders. Patricia ran calculations on her tablet and said maybe 72 hours at current fleet speeds. The council was moving faster than anyone expected. Someone in that ancient governing body wanted to make an example of humanity, and they wanted to do it quickly before other species got ideas about independence. Jake said they needed to get back to Earth immediately. Admiral Torres needed to know about the fleet movements, and the government needed to prepare for what came next. This was going to get much worse before it got better. The shuttle crossed back into human space and security. Patrols challenged them for identification. Even human military forces were on high alert now that the break with the council was official. Everything had changed in the space of a few hours. Daniel looked out the viewport at the stars that marked human territory. 43 systems filled with millions of people who were depending on the decision made in that council chamber. He hoped they made the right choice, but there was no way to know yet. History would judge whether humanity's Declaration of Independence was courage or folly. The shuttle docked at Earth's orbital station, and they were immediately escorted to a secure briefing room. Secretary Graham was already there, along with Admiral Torres and a dozen other military and civilian leaders. Their faces showed stress and worry and determination all mixed together. Graham said they had been monitoring everything, and they knew what happened in the council chamber. The question now was what humanity did next. The Council was mobilizing their fleets. Human space was about to be completely isolated from the galactic community. Daniel sat down heavily in a chair and said, "Humanity chose freedom over security. Now they had to figure out if they could survive the consequences of that choice." The real test was just beginning. 3 months passed since the walkout, and humanity faced its first real crisis that tested everything. The Council blockade had tightened like a noose around human space and cut off all the trade routes that colonies depended on. The immediate effects were not catastrophic, but the long-term implications looked dark and threatening. On the colony world of New Portland, the food supplies had become critically tight and dangerous. Governor Linda Pierce stood in the main agricultural dome watching technicians analyze soil samples and adjust hydroponic systems that were failing. The dome stretched for miles like a cathedral made of glass and steel, and it housed humanity's desperate attempt to make an alien world produce food. Ryan Brooks was the chief agricultural officer, and he was a thin man with worried eyes, though everyone had worried eyes these days. He said they had maybe 4 months before rationing became mandatory and people started going hungry. They were doing everything possible, but these crops were designed to work with Council supplements. Without those chemical formulations, the plants were struggling, and dying in production had dropped by 40%. Linda asked if there were any alternatives they could use instead of the Council's supplements. Ryan gestured toward a group of scientists in the corner of the dome who were hunched over equipment. He said Nina Walsh's team was working on the problem, but synthesizing complex organic compounds from scratch was not like following a simple recipe. They were trying to reverse engineer 10,000 years of agricultural science with limited equipment and no reference materials to guide them. Linda walked over to where Nina was conducting experiments, and the scientist looked up. Her face showed exhaustion from someone who had been working 20-hour days for weeks without rest. Nina greeted the governor, but said she could not offer encouraging news, because she did not have any yet. Linda asked for the truth, regardless of how bad it was. Nina pulled up a holographic display showing molecular structures that looked impossibly complex. She explained that the Council's supplements were more sophisticated than anyone realized at first. They were not just fertilizers, but were programmed to interact with both the soil microbiome and the plants themselves at a cellular level, breaking that system down and recreating. It was like trying to rebuild a computer when you had only ever seen it turned on but never looked inside. Linda asked if creating new supplements was even possible, and Nina said everything was possible given enough time and resources. The real question was whether humanity had enough of either before people started starving. This was the challenge facing human space everywhere. Not dramatic warfare or open conflict, but the slow grinding difficulty of maintaining civilization without the infrastructure they had relied on from the Council. Every colony faced similar problems that seemed small individually, but added up to potential disaster. Medical supplies were running low in manufacturing. Equipment was breaking down without replacement parts, and educational systems struggled. Without access to Council databases full of knowledge, on Mars, the Director Claire Bennett coordinated the response and turned the colonial administration into a crisis management center that operated every hour of every day. She explained during a video conference with colony governors that they were playing a massive game of resource allocation across all human space. Every settlement had something others desperately needed. New Portland struggled with agriculture but had excess manufacturing capacity. Haven's Rest was food secure but needed medical supplies urgently. Earth had researchers, but limited rare element reserves for building things. Governor Nathan Cross spoke from Haven's Rest and said humanity needed a comprehensive trade network that worked. Without Council infrastructure, something that connected all the human colonies directly to each other, Claire said it was already in development, and they were calling it the Human Exchange Network. Every colony would contribute what it could produce efficiently and draw what it needed from other settlements. The system was not elegant or efficient compared to Council trade networks, but it should keep everyone functional while they developed permanent solutions. The network began operating within weeks, and human freighters moved between. Settlements on routes that carefully avoided council space. It was inefficient and slower than the old system, but it worked well enough. More importantly, it belonged entirely to humanity, and no one could take it away. Military developments are more concerning than the economic situation. Admiral Torres had spread his limited fleet across human space, creating a defensive perimeter that was more about psychology than actual protection. If the Council decided to attack, they could punch through human defenses almost anywhere they chose to strike. But the Council was not attacking, and that was somehow more worrying. They were just waiting and watching humanity struggle. Jake Sullivan had been leading intelligence gathering operations, and he returned from a reconnaissance mission into neutral space with troubling news. He met with Admiral Torres aboard the flagship Unity, which was a heavy cruiser that represented the best of human military engineering but was barely a match for an average Council patrol vessel. Jake reported that the Council was not preparing for war at all. He said they were preparing for a funeral instead. Torres raised an eyebrow and asked Jake to explain what he meant by that strange statement. Jake pulled up intercepted communications from Council channels. He said the Council was convinced humanity would collapse on its own without any military action needed. They were watching human supply problems and resource shortages and political divisions carefully. The Council thought all they had to do was wait patiently and humans would come crawling back, begging to be readmitted. To the galactic community, Torres asked quietly if the Council was wrong about that prediction. Jake met his gaze directly and said he did not know for certain. Humanity was holding together, but it felt fragile like glass under pressure. Every colony was one major crisis away from complete disaster. A crop failure, or a plague outbreak, or a reactor meltdown, or anything that overwhelmed their limited resources could make everything unravel fast. Torres stood and walked to the viewport looking out at the stars. He said humanity could not afford any major crises then. They needed to show the Council that humans were stronger than the ancient species believed. Jake asked how they could do that. Torres turned back with determination in his eyes. He said they would accomplish something the Council thought was completely impossible. The idea that formed became known as the Breakthrough Initiative among the humans working on it. Instead of trying to match Council technology piece by piece, humanity would leapfrog it entirely. Dr. Sarah Kim assembled research teams across human space and focused on areas where human thinking diverged from Council approaches to problems. The Council had refined their faster-than-light drives over thousands of years, creating systems that were efficient and reliable, but fundamentally unchanged for millennia. Human engineers had only 5 years of experience, but they approached the problem differently because they had no established traditions to follow. Carlos Mendez was the chief engineer, and he gave a presentation at the Mars Research Facility. He explained that the Council optimized for stability above all else. Every improvement they made was incremental and carefully tested, and designed to work within existing frameworks that were ancient. Humanity did not have existing frameworks, so they got to start fresh. His team had been working on a radical new drive design that used quantum entanglement principles in ways Council physicists dismissed as unstable and dangerous. It was unstable and prone to fluctuations that required constant adjustment. But it was also 30% faster than Council drives and required only half the energy to operate. Carlos said they were calling it the skip drive because instead of creating a smooth, warp bubble-like Council ships, it sort of skipped through space-time in jumps. It was not elegant or pretty, but it worked when they tested it. The first test used an unmanned probe and exceeded all expectations. The second test with a small crew aboard nearly killed everyone when the drive fluctuations created localized gravity anomalies that crushed equipment. The third test with refined controls and better shielding worked perfectly and everyone survived. Within 6 months, human ships equipped with skip drives were outrunning Council vessels easily. This opened up trade routes and exploration opportunities that the blockade could not close. The Council tried to intercept human ships, but they were simply too slow to catch them. Similar breakthroughs happened across multiple fields of science. Medical researchers developed treatments for diseases. Council medicine considered incurable by using aggressive gene therapy techniques no elder species would risk trying. Agricultural scientists created crop variants that thrived without supplements by splicing together genetic code with an abandon that made council biotechnicians uncomfortable. Manufacturing engineers designed automated systems that could turn asteroid minerals into finished products without the rare elements council factories required. None of it was elegant or followed proper scientific protocols. Most of it violated council safety standards and aesthetic sensibilities completely. But it worked, and more. Importantly, it was improving rapidly with each iteration. The turning point came when Nina Walsh successfully synthesized not just a replacement for the council agricultural supplements, but an improved version that worked better. She presented her findings to a packed auditorium at the new Portland Science Institute, and her voice shook with excitement. 1 year after the walkout, Daniel Harper returned to Earth. For the first time since that confrontation, in Chamber 9, he stood in Secretary Graham's office in Geneva, looking out at the city below, and thought about how much had changed in 12 months. Everything was different now in ways both obvious and subtle. Graham handed Daniel a data tablet and said the council wanted to talk again. Not a summons this time, but an invitation instead. They were requesting a diplomatic meeting to discuss the current situation between humanity and the galactic community. Daniel read through the message, noting the careful phrasing and the complete absence of demands or ultimatums. He said the council was scared, and Graham shook his head. He said he thought the council was confused more than scared. They expected humanity to collapse under the pressure of isolation. Instead, humans were expanding faster than ever before. The new colonies in the Kepler sector were thriving beyond anyone's expectations. Human technology was advancing at a pace that made council bureaucrats deeply uncomfortable. And the blockade they thought would strangle humanity had become completely irrelevant. It was true and undeniable now. The skip drive had rendered the council blockade meaningless. Human ships could simply jump past any obstacle the council put in their way. This opened trade routes through previously unexplored space that belonged to no one. More concerning for the council was that several minor species had noticed this development and were quietly inquiring about human technology. Daniel asked what the council wanted from this meeting. Graham said that was exactly what Daniel was going to find out. Admiral Torres and Dr. Sarah Kim would go with him as part of the delegation. But Graham emphasized that this time Daniel was negotiating from a position of strength instead of weakness. He told Daniel not to forget that important fact. The meeting took place not at the Central Forum, but on a neutral station at the border between human and council space. The location itself carried significance because it meant the council was coming to meet humanity halfway instead of demanding. Humans come to them like subordinates. The delegation that arrived surprised Daniel considerably. Instead of the Cavrish or other elder species, the council sent Ambassador Thren of the Morvi, along with representatives from 3 of the younger member species. All of them had been vocal critics of how the council handled the human situation previously. Thren greeted Daniel, and its gas cloud swirled within the containment suit in patterns that suggested agitation or nervousness. It thanked Daniel for agreeing to meet, and Daniel replied that he was curious about what they wanted to discuss after a year of silence. They moved to a conference room and settled around a table, designed to accommodate various alien body types. Thren spoke first, and its words were completely unexpected. It said simply that the council was wrong about humanity. Daniel exchanged quick glances with Admiral Torres and Sarah Kim. He asked Thren to explain what it meant by that statement. Thren continued and said the council's approach to humanity was founded on assumptions that proved false. They believed all species required the same careful guidance and the same gradual integration into galactic civilization. They believed stability was paramount above all else, and that rapid change was inherently dangerous to civilized society. Sarah Kim asked what changed their minds. Thren said they watched humanity accomplish in 1 year what most species took centuries to achieve. The skip drive alone represented a theoretical breakthrough the Council had not seen in 5,000 years of scientific development. Human agricultural innovations and medical advances and willingness to attempt what the Council deemed impossible was forcing them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about civilization. Admiral Torres said flatly that the Council was here to ask for human technology. Thren surprised them again by saying no. They were not here to ask for technology, but to ask how humanity did it, not the technical specifications, but the underlying principles. What allowed humans to innovate so rapidly and what freed them from the constraints that limited Council species for thousands of years? Daniel considered his response very carefully before speaking. He said humanity did not have a choice at first. The Council isolated them and cut them off from support systems. Humans had to innovate quickly or die slowly. But he said that was not the complete answer to Thren's question. He pulled up holographic displays, showing human history across thousands of years. The wars and achievements and failures and triumphs, the endless cycle of destruction and creation that defined human civilization since the beginning. Daniel said humanity had never been stable in their entire existence. Human history was chaos, and they tried things that did not work. They built systems that collapsed. They made mistakes that cost millions of lives. But humans never stopped trying new things. They never accepted that the way things were was the way things had to be forever. Thren acknowledged that this instability terrified the Council. It said the unpredictability still frightened the elder species even now, Sarah. Kim said maybe that was the fundamental problem with Council thinking. They spent so long trying to prevent catastrophe that they forgot how to create anything new. They optimized for not failing instead of optimizing for succeeding. One of the other delegates was a young Keth named Kilvin, and it spoke up. It said some of the younger species had noticed this pattern. The elder species warned them for centuries that rapid change leads to destruction. But they watched humanity and saw that rapid change could also lead to extraordinary achievement. Daniel asked if they were speaking for themselves or representing the Council officially. Kilvin admitted they spoke only for themselves. The Council was divided now. The elder species still believed humanity would eventually destroy itself through recklessness. But the younger species were starting to wonder if maybe they had been destroying themselves slowly all along, just in ways too gradual to notice. The implications were profound and far-reaching. The Council's unity that had been maintained for thousands of years was beginning to fracture, and humanity was the catalyst that caused the split. Daniel asked what happened next and where this conversation was leading. Thren's gas cloud swirled in complex patterns inside its suit. It said that depended entirely on humanity. The Council was prepared to offer a revised relationship. Not membership with all its traditional restrictions, but a partnership instead. Access to Council knowledge and trade opportunities and diplomatic recognition. In exchange for access to human innovations and a promise not to destabilize the existing galactic order. Admiral Torres said bluntly that arrangement would not work at all. Humanity could not promise not to destabilize the Council's order. Destabilization was what humans did naturally. It was what made them effective at solving problems. Kilvin asked what humanity proposed instead of the Council's offer. Daniel thought about the question and about everything humanity learned in the past year. About colonies that thrived when forced to solve their own problems. About breakthroughs that came from refusing to accept limitations. About the fundamental difference between human civilization and the Council's carefully managed stability. Daniel said humanity proposed nothing at all. Humans would continue doing what they were already doing, building colonies and developing technologies and growing at their own pace. If the Council wanted to participate, that was fine. If not, that was also fine. But humanity was not changing course to make ancient species comfortable. Thren asked if humanity was willing to risk conflict with the Council. Daniel replied that humans were willing to risk everything for the freedom to determine their own future. That was what the Council never understood about humanity. Humans did not calculate acceptable losses and optimize for survival. They bet everything on possibilities the Council would not even consider. The meeting continued for hours. but the fundamental positions did not change at all. The Council wanted humanity to be more like them, which meant careful and measured and predictable. Humanity could not be those things, even if they wanted to change. When Daniel returned to Earth and reported to the United Defense Committee, the response was mixed as expected. Some members were disappointed he had not secured a formal agreement. Others were relieved that humanity's independence remained completely intact. Secretary Graham summed up the situation simply. He said they were on their own, but with the option of trading with Council space if they wanted to. Daniel confirmed that was basically correct. But he said it was much bigger than simple trade. The Council was fracturing internally. The younger species were questioning everything they had been taught. The elder species were losing their grip on absolute authority. Humanity did not just walk out of the Council. They showed the entire galaxy that alternatives to the old system existed. 5 years after the walkout, human space had transformed in dramatic ways. 73 colony worlds now flew human flags. The skip drive had been refined and improved multiple times, making human vessels the fastest ships in known space. Human technology that was initially focused purely on survival had become sought after across the galaxy. But the most significant changes were not technological at all. They were cultural and philosophical. The Council maintained order through hierarchy and deference to ancient authority. Humanity proposed something radically different: cooperation between equals and shared innovation in the freedom to succeed or fail on your own terms. Several minor species, inspired by humanity's example, had withdrawn from the Council. Others were negotiating new relationships that were less restrictive. The monolithic structure that governed the galaxy for 10,000 years was evolving rapidly, and no one knew where it would lead.